Welcome to The Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful. Well, hello, everyone. This is Melissa with The Fully Mindful. And on today's episode, I'm happy to introduce Gina Gratza. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist with over a decade of experience in trauma, eating disorders, relationship healing. She specializes in psychedelic-assisted facilitation. She's deeply influenced by her work with individuals who are navigating trauma and eating disorders. She's trained with the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies with MDMA for PTSD at the Polaris Insight Center for Ketamine. She's also served as the program coordinator and lead educator at InnerTrek, nurturing future psilocybin facilitators. She's also engaged in psychedelic research with the Social Neuroscience and Psychotherapy Lab as a research study therapist supporting veterans with PTSD. She's based here in Portland and runs a private practice focused on women's empowerment, grief work, and holistic healing. So excited to have you here today, Gina. Welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here. We've talked a little bit previously about your work, and so I'm very excited to have listeners hearing a little bit more about what you do. Before we get there, perhaps you could share maybe a pivotal moment or experience that led you down this path of working in therapy and helping other people overcome trauma and grief and other issues.
Yeah. I think my introduction to therapy started when I was a young preteen, so about 12 years old, and going into my own therapy after my parents divorced. And that really started a journey for me and seeing many therapists. And I just remember feeling a sense of like, they're not doing it right. I remember just being young, and it's hard. Child therapy is hard.
Yeah.
But I just remember feeling so disconnected from the therapists. I felt super invalidated. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel any connection. And I just remember being young and being like, I could do this differently.
Yeah.
And it stayed with me throughout high school. And then when I was in my early 20s, tried some other things. And then eventually I was like, nope, I want to be a therapist, and went back to school to become a therapist.
That's so interesting. I also have some experience as a young person in therapy. And I mean, I know how hard it is to do therapy at all, let alone with children. It's just I think we would agree, a specialty, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. And I know that one of the therapists that I saw really did not know. They were clearly out of their depth, and I had the same reaction. And, it wasn't helpful. It ended up maybe causing more harm than good. And so I applaud you for continuing to remain interested in it, despite the fact that, at least for you, it sounds like it kind of fell flat. Like you just didn't feel connected, and it just didn't really do any good. Maybe it didn't do any harm, but it didn't do any good. And so when you went into your initial education around this, you said you wanted to do it differently, like it had to be done differently. What did you have in mind that you wanted to do differently than what you had experienced?
I went to get my master's in marriage and family therapy with the intention of deepening my education on relationships and humanistic and transpersonal psychology. Those are the modalities that most resonate with me because it's very relational. It's not following a particular script. It's very in flow. So what I thought I would be doing differently is genuinely connecting with people, not just following a script, not just doing what I have to do, take the notes and be done with it, but really connecting with other human beings. And I think that's been a bit of an emotional superpower of mine. When I was younger, it was really, I think there was a lot of shame about being sensitive, being too loud, being too emotional. But as an adult, they're beautiful skills for being a helper and a therapist and a counselor or coach or a support person. So I've kind of alchemized the pain of feeling othered by my sensitivity and transformed it into being a gift that serves me in this career.
I really like that. And I like this idea of it being relational, because having had my fair share of therapy, and I'm sure other people out there listening might have had this experience too, where the therapist, I mean, they're just doing what they're trained to do, right? You know, what brings you here today? How did that make you feel? Then what happened? Is there something that this relates to in your childhood? And how do you think it relates? And how did you feel then? And you're not supposed to share anything about yourself with the clients. And everything that I know about connecting with other people seems to scream against that approach, right? Like, how can you possibly develop a really authentic rapport with someone without some of those relational skills, right? Just asking questions, checking the boxes. And even if you do it with a very empathic voice, right? Even if you have empathic body language, how can you possibly do it if you're not actually relating to the client, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you go about relating to the people that you have worked with or that you continue to work with? Can you give us some examples? Obviously not revealing any client confidences, but your own approach to relating to clients.
Yeah. I feel like the more work I do on myself, the more I can be a grounded, centered, supportive, reflective, mere caregiver of sorts, support. So I believe in doing my own therapy, my own journeys. Like it's just really important for me to just clean my own vessel so that I can be fully present with somebody. And so I specialize in trauma, and it's no surprise a lot of people that do have their own trauma.
Yeah.
So as I've been working on processing and healing my past pains, it's allowed me to also be present and identify and support people through their pains. And I think the biggest thing that really changed my practice was learning sensory motor psychotherapy, EMDR, internal family systems. These modalities are really centered in understanding the body and parts language and emotions and sensations. And so when I'm with another person in the room, I'm paying attention to all of that. It's not just what are you coming in with cognitively, but how are people arriving in the space in their body? If the body is curled up, legs crossed, arms crossed in the corner of the couch, that's communicating something to me. That's communicating being contracted. Versus if somebody comes in and they take up space on the couch and their chest is open and they're smiling and laughing, it's a myriad of things of what that could be, but it's a bit more open expression than the contraction. So working with the body, understanding the body, and then asking people the level of awareness that they have around what they feel inside their body. What are you noticing sensationally inside when you talk about this painful thing? If there's no connection to body, that also just lets me know their level of inner awareness. And then emotions too, which many of us, we weren't trained on how to identify, understand, and accept our emotions. Right. So a lot of the beginning work that I do with people is making space for all emotions to be normal, present, accepted, and that there's no good or bad. I don't really like labeling emotions as positive or negative. They just are. If we start saying like, oh, I just feel all the negative emotions all the time, then that person's going to feel like they are negative versus like, yeah,
Right.
my heart feels really sad. I'm really grieving these days. So the charge is taken away, which makes a big difference.
So many follow-up questions. Let's see. The first one I have is you were talking about working with people who have experienced trauma. And a lot of people seem to understand trauma in terms of what I'm going to call big T trauma. Something really significant has happened to this person. They were in a horrible car accident. A parent died when they were very young. They had experienced sexual assault. Those are some examples, right? Certainly there would be more. But there's also trauma of I guess people call it the little t variety, right? The small t variety. And if you could talk about if you see a difference between these more significant capital T traumas versus these little t traumas and how they impact people in their everyday lives.
I actually don't use big T, little t language. Mm-hmm. Personally, I feel like that minimizes people's experiences. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a fan of that language for me. I understand for some people it can help contextualize, but what I find in working with early childhood wounding is some folks really need to occupy the space of affirming that a need wasn't met in childhood or that there was neglect or abuse that didn't leave a mark. And that needs to be acknowledged as trauma too. And what I hear a lot with people who don't feel like it's a big enough trauma is they just don't give themselves space to acknowledge that it is trauma and that it did impact them. And we don't have to compare it to other people's traumas. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We can all be impacted by different things. And some things may impact someone, and some of the very same things may not impact people in other ways. So I don't like to compare. You are leaving a situation impacted and wounded that shows up in your current life today. I think Gabor Mate once said, there are many ways to kill a houseplant. You can cut it, you cannot water it, you can neglect it, you could talk badly to it. Like there's many ways to cause injury. And it's different with each human being and how our nervous systems and metabolism and sociocultural factors around us, support systems, all of these things impact it. So I think I don't know if I answered your question or gave more.
No, you did. And I know Gabor Mate also talks about trauma, I think in exactly the same way that you were describing it, in terms of it's not so much what happens to the person, it's how that event or those things impacted the person, right? And those will be, as you've said, could be very different for each person, even with a very similar event. So we're both in the same terrible car accident. Somehow I'm fine and you're not, right? And it doesn't mean that I'm somehow better adjusted or better than you. It doesn't mean that you are more sensitive than me. It just means that it's had this impact on you, and for whatever reason, it hasn't on me. And there could be a whole multitude of interconnected reasons why that is.
Absolutely. And it's really like understanding the nervous system on such a more deep level than what we normally think about, like our defense mechanisms and the amygdala and how we respond to fear. And then also bringing in attachment theory. The early studies on attachment theory with Mary Ainsworth and the early videos that people were doing with children, you can see the impacts, the emotional impacts of caregiver neglect. And that doesn't just stop when you're 18. The impacts of attachment trauma live with us, inside of us, until we are able to turn towards it, identify it, heal it, either with ourselves, with another, or in partnership. But it's there. especially if we witnessed a lot of emotional turmoil in partnership with our caregivers.
Right. And so much, I mean, we as humans are highly adaptable in so many ways, right? For better or for worse, right? We are adaptable. And so if we experience a trauma, say you mentioned neglect by a caregiver, and we may learn early on these, adaptation skills of how not to feel that way, and we compartmentalize, or we do whatever we do to not feel those things. But that also doesn't mean it goes away. It just may come out in a different way, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, we're
And
really good at our brain is amazing. I am amazed by the brain. In working with complex trauma, I have so much appreciation for the way that the brain naturally takes care of us. It may not seem like it when there's maladaptive coping skills that arise in the face of trauma, but it's also incredible to see the ways in which the brain wants to take you away from remembering horrific things, or wants to distract you, because it's all meant to protect you until you gain enough resources to be with the pain, the discomfort, the memories, the hurts, the traumas. And then when you're in that safe place, the body starts to unwind. When we're talking about somatic therapy and some of the releases that happen in the body when there's that space and permission and trust within the system, like, okay, we're not in that trauma anymore. We can be here right now and looking in the past. There's a little bit of EMDR work, like one foot in the present while we go back into the past and process. And it's remarkable what the brain does to take care of us.
it is. And just so listeners have some idea of what we're talking about, if they have not heard of EMDR or internal family systems or some of the others, I'm going to call them somatic based, even though I guess IFS isn't really somatic, but it seems somatic to me because we're talking about parts.
Yeah.
But if you could describe just a little bit of what those two modalities are and why they're so effective at helping people with trauma, and just people in general who might be struggling with a particular issue or ability to self-regulate or other issue that they might be struggling with.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching, and more. So contact me, Melissa, at The Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today.
Yeah. And I'll talk about that. And then I'll also just say, sometimes when I work with people, they don't like the word trauma. They're like, can we call it something else? You know, because there's some sort of taboo with the word trauma. Some people feel like they're being dramatic, or some people feel like it's too large of a word, or it makes them feel uncomfortable for whatever reason. No judgment. Then I just say, okay, wounding, pain, suffering that's distracting you from life. So internal family systems was created by Dick Schwartz. And that is essentially understanding that we are made up of parts, all of us. And that's very familiar to us when we say, well, a part of me feels this way, but a part of me feels that way. Or logically, I understand that, but emotionally, I'm just not okay with that.
Right.
So the internal family systems organizes around self energy. So self energy is what we're trying to get back into relationship with. And self energy lives within all of us. And he created the 8 C's to help us remember what self energy is. And it's rooted in calm, confidence, curiosity, courage, calmness, creativity, and care, I think. And then the parts are managers, aspects of ourselves that just keep going on with normal life. Nothing to see here. I'm doing great. Maybe it's a burdened part that's kind of a perfectionist,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe it's an unburdened part that's just task oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And these parts help get us through the day and through our daily tasks. And then there's the firefighters, and they're thrill seeking, spontaneous. And again, we have different aspects of burdened and unburdened. Burden might look like engaging in addiction patterns. And then unburdened might be like, let's take a trip. Let's go to Morocco. And then, of course, there's the exiles. And the exiles are known as our child parts, sometimes our feeling parts that feel sometimes outcasted. We don't want to show some of the more vulnerable sides of ourselves or some of the early childhood hurts and pains of why we feel what we feel. And managers and firefighters, before we start to understand our system, want to keep those exiles under wraps.
Right.
And so it's really about how can we make space to start to hear the internal dialogue of our many parts inside of us and reinstate the self energy to be driving the ship rather than some of the parts taking over the system. So we're making relationships. And what I love about internal family systems is, as a family therapist, for me, it feels like the most loving version of family therapy inside myself.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, that internal dialogue that you're talking about, it's happening anyway. We just often are not aware of it, right? We've learned to just put that in the background, right? But it's always happening. The internal dialogue between these parts it's always happening. So
like the self-critic, like, oh, you shouldn't have done that.
Right.
Oh, you would have been better if you did this instead. Yeah.
Yeah. I have that one big time.
Yeah, it's a popular one.
It's very popular, as is the perfectionist part of me as well. And so, it's about becoming or recognizing, like you said, those 8 C's and cultivating those 8 C's so that we become more self-oriented, more self-regulated, right? That person is now the captain of the ship. And instead of these other parts sort of running the show, and they serve their purpose. And that's what's so amazing. And I love this work because to me, it reminds me also of, self-compassion work, right? And Kristen Neff and Chris Garmer's work on self-compassion, and that it's not to alienate these parts. If anything, it's to give them compassion, right? To recognize that they were serving a purpose and trying to keep us safe and secure and happy. And they did the best that they could. And so I love internal family systems for this. I don't understand why every therapist doesn't use this system, because it seems so, it's who we are as humans. Like you said, we have that natural language that I think probably every culture uses. Oh, that part of me that doesn't like this. So there's part of me that is uncertain, or there's part of me that, and then we get confused. Why do I have all these parts? I just want to be integrated. Right. And so here's this modality to do just that. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a beautiful model. There are many other models that are very similar to it, and they've been around for a long time. It's just, it gets packaged differently with each generation. And I'm with you along self-compassion work. I don't think you can do trauma work without self-compassion. It's just an eventual place one has to get to really heal and move, is to be kind to ourselves, to be gentle to ourselves, to be compassionate to ourselves. And I think alongside trauma work is also grief work.
Yes. Yeah.
So grief and self-compassion. I mean, it's a journey. It is a lifelong journey to heal.
It is. And there are a lot of people, and I guess because I am a lawyer and I know a lot of lawyers, and I work with lawyers and doctors and other professionals who have more of what we traditionally call, I don't like this term, but a type A personality, right? And very driven people. And I've also worked with a lot of law enforcement, and they have that same similar personality. They're very driven, and they hear self-compassion and they many people recoil, right? Because they think, oh, that's going to make me weak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why would I be nice to myself? It's the fact that I'm pulling myself up by the bootstraps and, kind of giving myself a hard time. That's why I'm successful in my life and career, not because I'm going to give myself some sort of soft self-compassion, or there's something that they recoil about, like the
Mm-hmm.
process of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you've experienced that with some of the people that you've worked with, or I know Kristen Neff's work has, the research proves otherwise. The more that we're self-compassionate, actually, the more effective we are, right? The more focused we are, the more creative and open-minded we are, which
Mm-hmm.
can be helpful in problem solving and all sorts of things. But from
Mm-hmm.
your perspective, do you have any experience with people experiencing that? And if so, what have you done to help them work through that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's popular for a lot of people. I don't know where that began, that we had to be hard on ourselves in order to succeed. And I would invite people to just be curious about, how are your relationships? What do you notice when it comes to closeness with others? Is it easy? Are there
Mm-hmm.
walls? Are you craving more intimacy between you and your partner?
Mm-hmm.
I think the level at which we can show ourselves kindness and care and gentleness and forgiveness and, dare say, love,
Mm-hmm.
the more we can offer that to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And we can really live in more harmony
Mm-hmm.
with the ones that we choose to be closest to, in vulnerability, in openness. But if there's this, like, I don't need to be nice to myself, I just need to push through, which means I'm not listening to my body, which means I'm not feeding myself things that my body is asking for, which means I'm not stretching, I'm not taking care of my body. These are ways in which you might neglect yourself. Then how does that ripple into the relationships around you that you're trying to build closer connection to?
Mm-hmm.
So when you start to say, okay, here's how I'm going to start to be kinder to myself. And Kristen Neff has a beautiful self-compassion workbook. So for anybody who's just like starting from the beginning, Kristen Neff has free downloadable meditations. Actually, I don't know if they're downloadable, but they're free on her website. And she's got a book, Fierce Self-Compassion. Tara Brach has one on self-compassion, Radical Acceptance. And I would just encourage people who feel like this is, not for them, just to be curious. Again, there's that C of self energy, curiosity. Gosh, I don't know about this thing. Can it really be so bad to be kind and compassionate to yourself? We don't bat an eye at being kind and compassionate to other people. That makes a lot of sense to us. What would the world be like if we were all a little bit more patient with one another, a little bit more kind, a little bit more understanding? So then it's like, well, yeah, if I were to look in the mirror, I bet it would be really nice to receive that too from myself. And especially with trauma, one of the things that I have my clients reflect back to me is, tell me all the things you wish you would have had from your parent. Tell me all the voids. What were the needs? I wish you would have told me you were proud of me.
Right.
I wish you would have told me that you loved me. I wish you would have told me that I'm okay exactly as I am. I wish you would have told me that I matter. I wish you would have told me to go for my dreams, whatever. So then I'm like, okay, you know exactly what the voids are within. Can you go to the mirror and start giving that to yourself now? And I get it. You're not gonna look in the mirror and then suddenly be like, boom, I said it. It feels great. I filled the hole. It's gonna be awkward. It's gonna be crunchy. You're gonna doubt. You're gonna roll your eyes. You're gonna scoff. You're gonna laugh. But it's a practice. I mean, the same with any meditation practice. You have to do it again and again and again. It's not with this feeling that you're going to master it immediately, but that over time you're changing the dialogue in your mind, and it will show a difference in your life when you start being kinder to yourself. And I know that firsthand.
Yeah.
And what I see with my clients too. I weave it into the work that I do with people. So when people start to see me every session, we're doing a meditation, a visualization, a somatic scan, a reading, a blessing, a poem. We're doing something that's getting us into heart space.
I love that too. And I know I've said that a few times already, but I do. I think this connection between mind, body, emotion, soul, all of it, right, is so critical. And just in Western culture, and maybe even other cultures, but Western culture is what I'm familiar with. We walk around like little floating heads on top of bodies, right? And we overemphasize and overvalue our cognitive abilities. Nothing wrong with cognitive abilities and anything related to cognition. It's great, but it's not the only thing. And we also have these bodies, which is why, meditation, breath work. I wanted to ask you about EMDR, but these more somatic based modalities can be so important, right? Because it's that integration between mind and body. And, I know lots of folks know about Bessel van der Kolk's work, and lots of people who've come after him with his book, The Body Keeps the Score. But we all kind of know, right? Like, ooh, my heart hurt when this person said this, or gosh, my head just wanted to explode. We already have languaging around the somatic experiences, but we haven't really fully realized that so much, right? And so these modalities help us integrate body and mind, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So to that end, I mean, EMDR is I don't know, I guess it's somatic. I think of it as somatic because you're doing something with your eyes. But can you tell us a little bit about EMDR?
Yeah. So EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, developed by Francine Shapiro. And this is a modality that uses bilateral stimulation. It can be with a wand or pulsars or tapping. And the idea is it mimics what's happening in REM sleep when your eyes go back and forth from left to right. And this gesture, this movement, while you're focusing on a memory that you and your therapist targeted, it's a memory that has a strong disturbance level for you. And the rapid eye movements work to bring down the disturbance level and shift a negative cognition into a positive cognition in association to the disturbing memory. And there are aspects of feeling into your body. So not everybody might have a visual memory. They might have a sensation in their body. And then you can use the bilateral stimulation for what's arising in the body. And then you install what we call a future template, like how do you want to behave in the future when the triggering event that brought up this thing arises now, and you install new ways of being. It works beautifully with single incident traumas. So if you were in a fire or if you got into a car accident, it can move through and bring down disturbance levels fairly quickly. But if it's developmental trauma, which is trauma that happens over a long period of time, often in childhood, then it takes a little bit longer because the belief systems that were created were really securely embedded in the system because it was over years. So it takes more sessions than a single incident trauma would.
So something like parental neglect, caregiver neglect, where it's not just a single incident, it's over time. And it's when often the child is very young and their brainwave state is usually in more theta, right? So more open and really like sponging it in, right? It becomes a set point. And so it seems like it would take a little bit more time to work through that. And also our cognition isn't totally developed when we're younger. So it's that not having words to describe an experience, which is what EMDR and tapping, at least I've done both of those, has been so effective is like, you don't necessarily have to have the words, right? You can still work through something, even if it's something that happened to you or a series of events that happened to you when you didn't have words, or at least those words, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, just to give the listeners a bit more context on somatic therapies. So there's somatic experiencing by Peter Levine. And then I trained sensory motor psychotherapy from Pat Ogden. And that is really working on what people call bottom up approaches. So a lot of talk therapy would be top down, cognitive, and then maybe into the feeling body. And this is working bottom up, feeling body, only to end with the cognition. So as somebody comes into the office or online, you're working with, okay, so here's a story, but tell me what you're noticing in your body right now. Okay, your stomach is clenched. Can we just be with the clenching in your stomach? Is that okay? Just to pause there, be with it, and really massaging out the imagery of it. What is the color? What is the texture? Is it okay to stay with this? What are you noticing as you stay with this? Oh, another sensation arises. Okay, can we follow that? So it's a lot of just being in the body, being with the emotions. I don't want to be here. I'm angry right now. Okay, can we notice the anger? What is the anger showing up like in your body? It just makes me want to just like punch a wall. Okay, can we just stay with that sensation? And maybe we go to a wall, but instead of punching it, we really consciously feel the energy in the body. And usually it's in the arms. And then we like push the wall and then pull back, take a breath. What are you noticing? Where's the anger now? Oh, it's in my hands still. Okay, let's push the wall again. It's very thoughtful. It's very intentional. And then you breathe and you check back in. So that's an example of what somatic work is going to be more like. And of course, there's many variations and many different techniques. But the idea is like we're staying with sensation. We're staying with the experience now as it's showing up versus tell me the whole narrative and how did this happen and why do you think that is? And there's a place for that. And it's helpful for certain symptoms and struggles, but this is a little different.
I'm struck by, I have training in somatic coaching, which is different than what you're talking about. But there is one of the modalities, one of the techniques that we use is called focusing, which is very similar to what you were just talking about identifying where in the body and then, maybe even asking not only is it okay to stay with this, but what does this, whatever it may be that you're experiencing, what does it have to tell you? Does it have something to communicate to you? And what I found is people are able to get in touch with something that they had no idea was even there, right? And they're surprised, and therefore the impact can be more kind of revolutionary to them. Like they had no idea that this was the root cause of the issue. And then they just feel better because they've done something like your wall exercise where now they've released it. And it's just plainly not there anymore, which is why it can be so impactful.
And helpful to know, one, it's okay and safe to feel in your body.
Yes.
And when you do turn towards yourself and give yourself permission to feel what's arising, you're expanding your capacity to tolerate discomfort and you're building trust within yourself. And then you're resourcing. So the next time something uncomfortable arises, you can trust that you can be with yourself. And when you are with yourself, it moves. Like it moves. And that I think is just...
I know, it's mind blowing. I mean, there's that, I think it's probably a Buddhist principle, and I've heard it a million times, but it's also part of, I think, neuroscience and your work, which is whatever we resist persists, right? Yeah. So it's in the active resisting of trying to push it down or away, instead of if we can find a way to be with it, it actually resolves, right? And like you said, we learn how to trust ourselves that, oh, it did resolve. I was okay. I'm going to be okay. And so when it happens again, we are more resourced. And so we're more resilient. We're more in our self.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we start to massage that inner healer within.
Mm-hmm.
The more we trust ourselves, the more we can regulate ourselves, resource ourselves, be in connection and communion with ourselves, then that is it. That is the work. You're doing it, And
Mm-hmm.
it's maybe then you start to go to therapy a little less, and then you stop, and
Right.
you move with that throughout the rest of your life. Like, well, there's never going to be a day where, I mean, maybe there'll be a day, but there will never be a month when I won't need self-compassion practices. It starts to be threaded throughout our life and our being and our way in which we walk in this lifetime, because you're never going to not need self-kindness. It can
Right.
be a really harsh world, and there will be another difficulty in your life, maybe a tragedy, and you will suffer again. And when you get off track, you're going to be guided back to get back to yourself. And what are your tools? What are your techniques? How are you tuning into the body when you really want to get out of the body? But what
Right.
happens if you just stay with the pain? What if happens if you just wait for that craving to pass? What if you fill in the blank?
And I think you've already said this, but it's worth emphasizing this idea of, yes, self-compassion, self-kindness for the act of self-compassion and self-kindness, but also because it impacts how we are in the world. And so it impacts other people, people we love, people in the community that we don't even know, and people in the larger world that we might come into contact with. The kinder we are to ourselves, the more compassion that we have with ourselves, the more we work through this and understand that we are capable of working through whatever difficulties we have, the better we are in the world. We model that for other people. We have a certain, I think, energy about ourselves that is welcoming and inviting and safe for others.
Totally. And with that is honoring that we're human, right? As much as I want to embody love and lightness, I have bad days and I have grouchy days. And that too needs love and kindness from myself when I might be embarrassed of how I behaved, or how I wasn't as sociable as I wanted to be with somebody. Or maybe I just didn't engage and they were like, "What's up?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." Maybe that too can be shown kindness of, "It's all right, Gina. It's an anniversary of someone you loved passing,"
Mm-hmm.
or it's just a funky day and you just feel weird, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, we don't just feel self-compassion and self-kindness when everything's great, right? I mean, really, it becomes very useful when we are having those funky days. When we did just have a crappy interaction with our child or our partner, and we need to be kind with ourselves about that and recognize that we're human, we're not perfect, and so these things are going to happen. And it's another opportunity for learning to love ourselves, even though we made a mistake, even though we said something, did something, thought something that we would have rather have not done, said, or thought. Well, I want to also make sure that we talk a little bit about the other work that you have done, which is really interesting. And I don't know how this all fits together, or maybe it doesn't. You can tell me. But the psychedelic facilitation and how that has fit into the work you do, not as a therapist, but separate from that.
Well, back in probably 2015, I decided that I wanted to start working with eating disorders. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to work with women in low self-worth. That was my passion back then, still is. And that path took me down the trauma route, understanding that eating disorders are a flight response, running away from yourself.
Mm.
So the work is running towards yourself. And a lot of folks struggling had trauma. And so that's what led me to get trained in all the modalities that I did. And then alongside that, I had been learning about the MAPS program, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, for MDMA, for the treatment of PTSD. And so I started following the conferences and following Rick Doblin and volunteering at the Zendo project at festivals and really appreciating the research that was coming out for MDMA and the efficacy that it had in supporting folks with PTSD. Mm-hmm. Nearly 80% of participants no longer diagnosed with PTSD. I was fortunate enough to be on a research trial and saw it firsthand. Some beautiful impacts. Study will be released next year. And it's a remarkable medicine because trauma, it heightens the amygdala. And so it has people on guard, hypervigilant. And in therapy, it's going to take years. It's going to take a long time of them trusting who I am to even begin to soften that. We're going to be doing a lot of resourcing. We're going to be doing a lot of grounding. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of emotional investment. And as it stands right now, we don't really have any modality that really is holding an equal balance to what we're seeing with MDMA, certainly not with SSRIs. Mm-hmm. SSRIs are going to maybe keep you in a window of tolerance for some people, but you're not getting deep down into any resolve or movement of the material.
And SSRIs are essentially commonly prescribed mood stabilizers, right?
Yeah. So really just any medications for the treatment of PTSD aren't showing the same level of efficacy as the research trials with MDMA. And I'll be fair, the MDMA trials are still in the phase 3, and the pool of participants has been, not large, maybe in consideration of some of other studies that have done, but it's all been privately funded too, and it's expensive to do research, and it's very long. I have been a part of a research team, and it's, oh my God, it's incredible. And I have a lot of respect for people that do research because it occupies a lot of their life.
Yeah.
And so with MDMA, we could talk for a long time about it, but I'll just say the basics. I also did a podcast with a normalized PTSD where I talked about this a little more at length. Mm-hmm. MDMA is bringing down the amygdala and it's enhancing oxytocin. And so the shifts of the chemicals happening in the brain allow the softening to happen in the session. And it's non-directive. So the therapist is not there to guide it, but there to really hold safe space. There's preparation. So people are aware of maybe what things to expect. And there's the invitation of allowing your body to move through what it knows to move through. So like you said before, the resistance piece, this, one of the phrases is the way out is through. Mm-hmm. So if you see that resistance, can you be with it? Can you walk through that scary door? Can you meet that? And trusting that there's an innate intelligence inside of you that wants to heal. Mm-hmm. If we cut our finger, the body is going to seal it up. And we trust that our body can do that. The same with healing. Mm-hmm. So with MDMA, there's so much happening that allows this to happen more effortlessly and more quickly than years of therapy. And a lot of the research trials, folks had done this for a couple sessions, and their all-day sessions last about 5 to 6 hours. And in year follow-ups, people were still reporting benefits. And that's what makes it really remarkable, is that it's not a daily medication. I mean, obviously, integration, ongoing therapy, those things are really helpful to make sustaining impacts of what you were downloaded with. Mm-hmm. And there's so much more. So if you're like, wow, this is interesting, I've never heard about this before, check out the MAPS website and read about what's going on. It's all over. Johns Hopkins University did psilocybin research. Oregon, we have legalized psilocybin facilitation in Oregon Health Authority approved service centers with OHA approved facilitators and manufacturers. So we're really trying to bring expanded states of consciousness work back into the public after being banished as a result of the war on drugs. And Michael Pollan did a really beautiful book that helped a lot of people who aren't privy to understanding psychedelics. He did a really beautiful job of talking about it in How to Change Your Mind, which is a book that was also adapted into a 4-part series on Netflix, which I also think was really well done. So if you don't really like reading books, the 4-part episode, each of those episodes is really, I think, potent. So, and then more recently, because I've been doing the trauma work and the psychedelic work for the last 10 years, learning about it and engaging it in the last few years since legal with ketamine and psilocybin and MDMA for research, then it took me down the path of grief work. I trained with Frances Weller on grief rituals, and that is such beautiful work. And I'm amazed by that. You know, that's not requiring any psychedelics or altered state or plant medicine. You're working with the material of your own emotion, and there's drumming, and a trance-like state is induced to help move grief that is stuck in community with others, because we were not meant to grieve alone. And we're all carrying grief, consciously or unconsciously. And Frances Weller talks about the different gates of grief and the many different ways in which we are grieving. And so that has been really potent work, and that has been informing what I'm doing these days, and also women's empowerment work.
Yeah.
So getting ready to launch a course for women's empowerment to help women rise in their voices, boundaries, assertive communication, expressions, song, chanting, humming, community in circles. Yeah, I think I'm really just seeing so many women who are wanting to rise and to reimagine themselves as they've always known themselves to be, but maybe felt oppressed or didn't feel like they could take up the space or didn't feel like they had permission. And I just see a lot more women these days wanting to take more risks about being their full selves. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, that is exciting. Two things that came up in the last couple of things that you mentioned about grief work and women's empowerment. And you said something I think so important to emphasize, which is that we weren't meant to be in grief alone, that we are meant to be in community. And yet how we grieve in this culture, generally speaking, is alone. And people who are grieving, those around them who love them, have no idea how to be with the grief, and they want to fix the grief. They want to, say it's going to be okay. They don't know. So I love this idea of doing this in community so that the grief can be shared, and the community is together to help the person who is grieving, or we're all grieving at some point. And I love that, and I love how also the women's empowerment is, at least the way that you're looking into it and working with it, is with community, right? It's not just, well, I, as a woman alone by myself, am on this journey. I mean, certainly that's true too, but you're talking about community activities, singing, chanting, dancing, drumming, whatever, right? Which, part of me just kind of goes, oh, I can't imagine doing that. I would be terrible at all of that, inner critic right there. But the other part, there we get back to our parts. The other part of me is like, yeah, absolutely. In community, like this is where we are strong, and we don't have to do this alone, right? We don't have to find our voices, get stronger, more assertive, fully realized, however we want to language it. We don't have to do that alone. And that there has been this societal expectation in both grief and empowerment work that we have to do it alone is crazy to me, right? I mean, we are social creatures. That is how we survive. That is how we are the top of the food chain, so to speak, is because we do things together.
The community piece, that has really spoken to me most, because I feel like in my therapy practice, I was just seeing so many people come in for the same thing. So many women feeling disempowered, disconnected from voice, feeling unable to have boundaries, unable to say no, really craving more sisterhood, really wanting to have more community events, wanting more friends, wanting more depth in their relationship, wanting places to talk about spirit and soul led activities and creativity. There's a way in which we can all come together and do this together. And then my dream would be that when the course is over, people find friendship and that there's an ongoing community, whether it's something that I can support, having some presence of, or just encouraging them to start a WhatsApp group after the course ends, meeting up. It's just like, how do we continue to sustain and feed relationships that nourish us? Because we need nourishing relationships to be inspired by, encouraged by, loved by, because we heal in community. We can't do this work alone. And again, we go back to relationships. My whole journey of becoming a marriage and family therapist, I never knew it would bring me here. And I'm so happy to know that 12 years later, I'm still in love with my field, and it's deepened from clinical practice and now feels a lot more soul and spirit led for me to believe in the power of relationships.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I don't really want to end this conversations, but as we get near the end of our time together, given all of this, where do you see your work going in the next 5 or 10 years? And how does that intersect where you see the larger community's work around mental health, spiritual health, what we're talking about here, nervous system health? Where do you see all of that kind of intersecting?
Well, I feel like COVID really helped people understand, acknowledge the impact of mental health, like the importance of talking about mental health. Before COVID, people at large were not giving mental health much attention. And since that occurred, there's more airtime for mental health. And my hopes is that we begin to weave it in with just as much importance as physical health. And it is happening. I see it happening. The younger generation, Gen Z, like they have no problem saying that they're in therapy. And I love that, because there's nothing wrong with saying you're in therapy. When someone tells me they're in therapy, I'm like, good for you. Good for you, right, that you would work on yourself, that you would invest in yourself, that you would say, I want to do some deeper work to be more available to myself, to others, to my work, to my passions. I love hearing people in therapy or coaching or whatever, like just working on yourself. That is a beautiful thing to do for yourself. So I would love to see the work continue to be destigmatized and celebrated. And then for myself, honestly, I love the path I'm on. And in 5 years, I would really like to be deeper into my offerings for women's empowerment work, and then grief work, and, retreats and psilocybin psychedelic facilitation in really safe ways. It's not something that I'm only doing. That's why I think it's important to have these other practices, because those feel like integration practices. Yeah. And right now, at least in Oregon, people are really excited about having these altered state experiences. But not many people are talking about, what do you do with it afterwards? Right. And the integration, that is what matters so much, because if you just go in and go back to life as it normally was and forget about it, what was it for? What you do with that material and how you weave it throughout your life matters. And that's where I feel like these groups that I'm supporting and creating can be really helpful in that integration or preparation process.
100%. Well, so how can people find out more about you, your work, the women's empowerment work, the grief work? How can they find out about you?
I can be found on Instagram at Gina Gratza.
I'll put these in the show notes.
Yeah,
too.
great. And then my website is ginagratza.com.
Yeah.
And I'm getting ready to begin offering more offerings in the fall. I do book clubs. I just completed a book club with Frances Weller's book. I'm getting ready to do another one for the fall. And that is really just like together we read, and then we also make time for just talking about it, led by journal prompts and meditations too. And then I'll be having consultation groups in the fall for other psilocybin facilitators. And then women's empowerment course coming up as well. And then I have a women's winter solstice retreat in the winter.
Yes. Winter retreat in the winter.
Yeah.
Love it. I mean, you have so much going on and it's so exciting. I will definitely put all of this in the show notes. I guess where I want to leave is I just want to make sure we covered everything that you were hoping we would cover. Is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have asked that we didn't get to talk about?
No, thank you so much. This was really lovely, and I really appreciate your questions, and it felt really good to talk about all of that. It feels like all the things that I care deeply about and that I wanted to talk about. So thank you for the platform. Thank you for your podcast and for your presence and for what you're offering to your listeners.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the work that you do. And I hope that at some point in the future, we can check back and see how this new work or newer work is going for you and the impact that it's undoubtedly having on many, many people.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd love that.
Hey, everybody, it's Melissa. And I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities? Or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations. It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.